Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Nachi Weinstein. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Feldheim Publishers. Feldheim publishes and distributes a large amount of books and Svarim, as I'm sure many listeners are aware. But I would like to highlight one specific book that came out fairly recently, which is titled The Darkei Shlomo, which is a biography of Rav Shlomo Leib Brevda, the life and teachings of an American-born gadol. This American-born gadol, Rav Brevda, was nurtured by the deep Torah wellsprings of his time, Rav Yechezkel Levenstein, the Chazon Ish, and the Brisker Rav, and went on to become a world-renowned Baal mussar, public speaker, and personal guide to countless students. He also authored extensive commentaries on the writings of the Vilna Gaon. Maybe listeners are familiar with this 4-volume work, Efa Shlema, on Rus. He also has his own Svarim, Melis Patar, and many others, and he wrote many Svarim. Now, the remarkable life and timeless teachings of this spiritual giant are available to all in heartwarming pages filled with precious stories, photographs, anecdotes, chizuk, and life-transforming insights ready to inspire a new generation of talmidim. You can check out the book and purchase it at your local Svarim store or in the link in the show's notes below. This episode of the podcast is also sponsored by Cedar Media Studios. Cedar Media Studios is a creative agency specializing in the strategic creation and successful execution of audio-visual communication strategies for top-level influencers. Their team is there to assist those navigating podcasting, audio production, and marketing. They help you grow your audience through the latest trends in digital marketing and bring years of experience in the audio and design world to best optimize and market their clients. Whatever it is that you're launching, Cedar Media Studios is there to help you take your communications to the next level. And so whether it's a podcast or any other type of Svarim books or other type of marketing that you need, you can reach out to Zevi Kaufman of Cedar Media Studios, especially if you want to do Svarim or book promotion. Zevi has extensive background and experience with that, so you can reach out to him. You can see the link for the WhatsApp below, or you can email Zevi, Z-E-V-I, at cedarmediastudios.com. That's cedarmediastudios.com. And again, check out the information. You can find the links in the show's notes below. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com, or see the links and information in the show's notes below. You can subscribe to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community, where I post new Svarim and books and other information, as well as the Svarim Chatter YouTube, the Svarim Chatter Substack. Those links are in the show's notes below, and you can also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen and subscribe, whether that's on 24/6, Spotify, Apple, wherever that may be. Also, this podcast episode about Rav Aharon Lopiansky's new book, Ben Yeshiva. The book is now available in stores and as well as online. So you can go to purchase it in your local Svarim store, or there'll be a link to Eshel Publications. You can purchase it directly, or you can purchase it from any website, any Svarim store that sells it. So enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Rav Aharon Lopiansky, who is Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva of Greater Washington, Tiferes Gedalia in Silver Spring, Maryland. And this time, we're going to be discussing Rav Aharon's brand new book titled Ben Yeshiva, Pathway of Aliyah, which is kind of similar take on his original Ben Torah for Life, which is meant for the working balabas. This is for Yeshiva Bochurim, and we'll discuss this. I first want to say that this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Arrow Resources in honor of David Goder for his tireless efforts on behalf of Eshel Publications. Now, so thank you, Rav Aharon, for joining me once again.
Very nice to be with you, Rav Nach.
So let's start off. I mean, we did a number of episodes together, but we haven't discussed Ben Torah for Life. I don't know if we have to give even a brief recap. Maybe one day we'll do that. But why did you decide to, after the first one was more meant for Balabatim, now you decided to write a book for Yeshiva Bochurim? Why the going from the Balabatim to the Yeshiva Bochurim, and why a book for Yeshiva Bochurim Bechlal?
So I guess we'll start from the second half first. It's one of the things I wrote this in the book. In Yeshiva by us, we have Vadim in Ali Shur. I do it both for two different sets of Vadim, for the first service Medrash boys, later base Medrash boys. I do for high school seniors once a week. And basically, the idea of having a bigger picture. Mussar tends to mean a lot of things. I always say mussar is the carpet that you sweep under it, everything that's etc. So, if it's not halacha and gemara, then it's mussar. Mussar means a lot of things. It means emotional pushing a person to do something right. It means being misbonein in avodas Hashem, but it means getting a picture, and he calls it shara dracha. And I feel it's very helpful when you get an overall picture of where are you headed to, what are you doing, how are you getting there, what are the pitfalls.
Now, why was that? Why did you decide? So, what about the first part of the question? Why going from a first book really meant for Ben Torah for life, about them? Why now? What is there a connection between the two? I should even ask it that way.
The connection is that I'm involved with both, and I guess it wasn't as if I sat down and decided the volumes are going to put out. It was what I felt in interacting with people. There's a need, and at that time I felt there was a lot of strong sense of that. I also feel that for Bochurim going to yeshiva, it's like the mussar says, "Miroiv persumam." Everyone knows what a yeshiva is today, and everybody is sure they know. But there's a lot that was left unsaid and really unknown. And I felt it's helpful if you understand what it's about, get a sense of the structure, the various parts of the building, and so on.
Who did you write the book for? Is it written for Bochurim? Is it written for Yugalai? Is it written for parents to read for their kids? Who's the book meant for?
So the answer is for anyone that wants to read it. I have there's no I would like a bacha who is maturing and about to move forward to read it and get Torahs out of it. There might be other people also who would have an understanding of what are the elements that are positive for a child to move forward if a parent feels it tells. But first and foremost, I think a bacha on the cusp of going into yeshiva gdola, part of the maturity, and again, this is something I write in Sefer, is you're on your own. Of course, your parents are there for you, and of course, your Rebbeim are there for you, and of course, everything. But you're an adult, and you need to grab the bull by the horns and not wait for someone to act on you.
Yeah, and that's a theme that you repeat throughout the book, and I'm sure there's something we'll come back to in the episode. So another thing that went into the book, and you do discuss this in the introduction, but I think it's worth pointing out here, is the balance how did you get the balance? Whereas the first book, Ben Torah for Life, it was written for a balabas, it's hadrocha, that you're speaking directly to someone. Of course, someone could have a Rav or Rosh Yeshiva that they're following, but okay, you're speaking directly to them. Here, it's much more nuanced because a lot of the Bochurim that the book is speaking to are in a yeshiva. They have, and every yeshiva has a different Mahalach Halimud, a different Rosh Yeshiva, a different style of chinuch. So how does the book attempt to balance that with like a broad tone as opposed to, but every yeshiva has a specific way of learning and way of life?
So first of all, I think the very point you're making is not so simple to Bochurim. I've spoken over the years with a lot of Bochurim, not in yeshivas and other places and so on, and the relationship, a strong relationship with a Rebbe, is unfortunately something today because of the numbers, because of the ruach, that people don't feel a need for it. In my days, the yeshiva and sitting and learning was the great exception, and the only way you made it there was because somebody had been mashpia on you, you had a kesher with somebody. Today, it's like, which place gets me into which best yeshiva next, which gets me into the next best place after that. It's almost as if, and people don't spend the amount of time in yeshivas, people don't feel the need to develop a kesher, and therefore, that itself is something that needed to be discussed. I feel that a lot of times it's like when somebody goes to a doctor, and if he read a book someplace or looked up online, and he comes in that I know it all because I read it, then he's short changing himself. Then he's not going to listen to the doctor, and the book or whatever it is that he saw online is not going to be exactly. But if a person walks in totally ignorant to a doctor's office, and he doesn't even know what to describe and what symptoms and what he should be going for, or to be an educated layman. So if a bacha has a certain sense, what am I looking for? What do all the different pieces mean? How do they fit in? And so on. Then he can have an intelligent relationship with his Rebbe and focus on what's important and understand what he's looking for. I have no problem if the Rebbe will tell a bacha this. No, we don't feel like that. We feel differently. That's fine. But the Bacha knows that that's an akuda that he wanted to discuss. And of course, and I make this point again and again, that it's your Rebbe who's guiding you, but at least you know the points and you understand what's happening and why it's happening, and you can ask the right questions and get the context for the answers.
So this book then is it more an advice rather than a guidebook? It's not a step by step. This is Yeshiva Bochurim X. You should be following this book each step in your yeshiva life. It's more global advice, and that a Bochurim, an individual yeshiva, can work on himself or deal with his Rosh Yeshiva, his Rebbeim.
Correct. And so let's give an example. Let's say the first thing we talk about is shkius, meaning immersion. First of all, to identify. It's not only how many hours are you learning, but how much is that the world of yours that it's become. That's a theme that's universal, hard for me to believe that somebody won't believe in it. However, a Rebbe will tell a Bacha, for you need to diversify, because you won't be able to last if you're totally into it. You need time to breathe. For a second Bacha, a Rebbe might tell, you're using the shkius as an excuse not to do your fair share for others. You need to give X amount of time so that you learn how to care for others. And a Rebbe might tell third Bacha, this is not learning unless you're shakur in it, and you're not shakur. It's a theme that a Rebbe, that a Bacha can understand where we're coming from, and be able to take the personal advice within a certain context. That's what I was hoping Bez Hashem to do.
Okay, so there's a number of parts of the book, and you touched on it. There's the global speaking, and we could talk about globally becoming a bardas, as you term it, and there's kind of the machshava part of the book. There's also the kind of mahalach halimud, bekiyas versus be'ion, mussar, chumash, halacha, different parts of that. And then there's also the part of the book that discusses various nisyonis a bacher has, whether outside things or even just internal kind of yeshiva things like jealousy and working on themselves and things like that. So we can talk about the different parts of the book, but just for the listener, there's a number of different parts of the book. Also, this book is bigger than Torah for Life. This book is, with the addendums, it's almost over 300 pages, a pretty big book. So just to mention that. So let's, in the beginning, you already mentioned the immersion in a Makam Torah, and that's something that is kind of different today. I think even when I went to yeshiva 15 years ago, it was more out of town yeshivas, more you did even more and more. I think it's less and less today. Today, living in Lakewood, most Bochurim stay in town, and it becomes, you go home at night and you go home all the time and you're more connected. I think you discussed in the book, everyone has cell phones and phones are readily accessible. When I was in yeshiva, you still needed a calling card. You weren't able to just call home, and there was like a few phones in yeshiva. So now everyone is much more connected. And what are the milas and chesronos of that, of having that kind of, the system is kind of different than this. It's a new system, essentially.
So certainly in essence, it's a lot more challenging system, and we have to figure out how to get around it. Being immersed in Torah, and this is the point I make. This is the difference between Ben Torah and Ben Yeshiva. In your yeshiva years, being immersed as much as possible is the key to Hatzlacha. Emotionally, psychologically, mentally immersed. Later on in life, different people do have different places where Dashgacha takes him to, and he needs to retain the inside of yeshiva while doing whatever he's doing, and he can't be immersed the way he was. But for a bacha, and that's why I assume if there's a plus is that a bacha today in yeshiva, in the environment that we have, is able to remain immersed. He'll be able to carry it on further in life. He's had the phones, like you said. He can go home at night. He can walk over and get a coffee and find out what's happening in the whole world. So he gets world news plus. World News plus Lakewood Hack. It's an amazing package in a coffee room. So but if a bacha learns and says, "This is where I need to be," and and so on, maybe it helps a bacha become a lot more able afterwards to do it right. Maybe that's a.
So let's take a step back even to the beginning of the book where you talk about, as you call it, titled part one.
By the way, I want to comment on that you said about Mendoza. If you take a look in Europe, in the heyday of yeshivas, no big city was matzliach in having a yeshiva. A yeshiva. Vilna did not have yeshiva. Yeah, the Milas, it didn't go. Minsk, which was, I don't know, a few miles away from the Mir, whatever it was, 20, 30 kilometers, I think, did not have a yeshiva. Kovna did not have a yeshiva. All of the big cities, yeshivas were not matzliach. They were matzliach only in towns. The Mir is a nothing by nothing. Slabotka, which is a suburb of Kovna, was cut off by a river. They didn't make a bridge till later. That was a nothing by nothing. And Radin was a fraction of a nothing by nothing. All these places, and it had to do with a lot of factors, but being able to be isolated and insulated was very effective. In the big cities, you had libraries and shows and maskilim and this and that. There was a hullabaloo, and it took away. It didn't work, and that's why the big yeshivas, Volozhin, is also all these places are nothing by nothings. That's where yeshivas were.
So, in that sense, are you a proponent today of going back to more the out-of-town system? Because really, it's become more and more the in-town system. It's not only Lakewood; it's even wherever it is, Muncie, other places. It's kind of become more in town.
So listen, it's hard to quote unquote change the world, but certainly younger age being home is important. I would say, like till 11th grade, kind of 16, 17, till 16, 17. There's an emotional part that needs a home, and it's healthier to be home, to be a parent. At some point, it certainly would be better to go out. Now, there are a lot of infrastructure issues. Getting a half a dozen Rebbeim to move out is not easy, and so on. Those are real logistic issues, and it's a mindset issue. But tachlis, having that type of being able, at least, so even if the yeshiva is quote unquote in Lakewood, making it a little further out, making a mentality that it's not automatic. You don't leave the yeshiva. It's not because it's a jail, but because this is where you are. My oldest boy, this was when he went off to yeshiva, to Yeshiva Ktana, which was like high school here, but over there it's like you're Yeshiva Bochurim. So the first Elul that he was there, he didn't want to come home because Elul, you don't go home. On the other hand, he needed certain things. I think he might have been also a bit homesick. So he would make up with my wife to meet him someplace, like even downstairs in the house. Like he had a feeling that, you want to be. So I know we have to look for eitzes in the settings that we have.
So, be that as it may, that's the system that we have now. This is something that you tried to talk about in the book. And we talked about the system. But let's talk about the beginning. You talk about pouring the foundation and becoming a bar das, and what it means for a bacher when he starts out in yeshiva. And this is something, you said the book is really meant for a bacher. Maybe a bacher reading as a little Medrash bacher, maybe a 12th grader or someone a little older. But, this is something that applies right away, even in 9th grade. So what does that mean? What do you mean by that, becoming a bar das for a bacher?
So, let's always compare it so that way it's easy to understand. In my days, becoming by the way, I had the schus to have. It's an uncle of yours, Rav Weinstein, or a great uncle?
Great uncle
of yours, who was a dugman the floor when I was a bacher, a young boy in high school. He was already a Torah. And he was a dmus. He was a dmus of somebody of a shakua called Kula and Learning. There's Hashem at Mevestim is still shakua, and it was a dmus. So in my days, unless you broke away and decided to buck the tide, to buck the trend, to go against the tide, to become your own person, you didn't end up learning. If you floated into college straight. That was the mitzias. That was what your parents wanted. That's what your society around you said is the right thing to do. That's where your friends went. So you had to say, no, I have a different she'ifa. I want something else, and I'm going to do it. Today, so a person grows up in our world with a very strong sense of kibbud aim. Baruch Hashem, parents know what's right, and they're doing it right. He's in a cheder environment, a Masifta environment, where his Rebbeim know what's right. The Gedolim are deciding for him what to do. And all he has to do basically is just follow. And then it continues. It doesn't develop a person. There comes a time when a person needs to do it out of personal hakara. It means waking up and saying, I'm responsible for myself. I am making myself the person that I will become. I need to think seriously about myself and make my decisions. Part of it, because we're supported so much and everything is, paid for us, the teva doesn't lend so easily. But unless that happens, then a person is not really, there's no surah of self-identity that I understand what learning it is, and I make that decision, and I have to struggle and weigh with every decision I make.
So then we turn to learning and Talmud Torah, and this is obviously the focus of
Right.
Yeshiva. But of course, we'll get to you already mentioned mussar and halacha and chumash. That's the basic Talmud Torah, especially first the Gemara. That's Lamaisa what Yeshiva focused on. There's Iyun and Bekiyas. But what's the basic components of Talmud Torah before we can dive into Iyun versus Bekiyas and even the different parts of Iyun?
So I guess it means, in one word, to that I know and understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah, what we're supposed to do, why we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to do. That's Torah. And it's so coming out, knowing and understanding Torah is what Talmud Torah is about.
Now, when we turn to Be'iyun, let's start off just as a basic. What do we even mean today when we say learning Be'iyun?
So I can't tell you what we mean today, because again, there's the we and there's the today. So everything needs to be defined. I'm not a spokesman for anybody, but let's go back to the Shorish. The Rambam says that a person has to know all Torah Shebiksav, all of Torah Shebapeh, which means the basic derivations of halachas that Chazal have of the Protei Adinim, plus, what Mishnah is, in a sense, Mishnah. And then the rest of it is to be ma'ayin, that's Gemara. And the Rambam says, Torah Shebiksav, Mikra, and Mishnah are finite. We learn it, we have it down, and we just keep chazing it enough so that we don't forget it. And the rest of the time we spend on that. The Rav Shlomo Brevda, the Rav Zalman, it's probably the most definitive work on Talmud Torah. He more or less uses that model. He adds nuance and so on, but by and large, that's the model. So that means when I'm learning, I need to have facts in front of me and the ability to keep on delving more deeply by comparing facts, by asking questions, by trying to understand sharply define what it says, resolving steers. I'm able to get to a much deeper place. I'm unfolding a lot more layers of Torah. Let's give an example. Taisus will ask from one sugya to another sugya, and then he'll answer by explaining that one of the sugyas is conditional. It's only because it isn't this. Now, we have a new halacha. Beis, we have a new havana. Why is it that it's limited to these circumstances? What's the core to halacha? Why is this an exception? And so on. So the process of understanding is really infinite. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu locked the infinity of Torah into that. The Torah facts are finite. It's from Bereshis to Learning Yisrael, Nefiyim, Ksuvim, that's it. You have the halachas of the Mishnah, the Teres Kanim, the Mechilta, Sifri, Zehu. Those are the things of Torah. For us, Talmud Bavli is also a thing. but understanding it, being able to address the places that are missing, understanding what is there, understanding under what circumstances halach apply, and so on. That's what Iyun is about. And so it's an intrinsic part of Torah in the big picture as well. Yeah.
Right. Now, something that you talk about in the book, and this is like a general, is this something that you're saying for everyone, or is it the one size fits all because there's no one really argues? Or no, I want not the part where you say, like a bacher really should learn the sugya. When they go to a sugya, you should really know the whole sugya and then kind of go back. Once you do the whole sugya Gemarashi with the basics, then you can start working through the sugya klar to understand what's going on in the lumdis and the iyun. But before you get there, you have to know the sugya. You can't read one line and then just start hacking iyun.
That I think is 100%. I cannot imagine that somebody would hold differently. I remember just like I was sitting at Nochem Shir once. There was somebody sitting mamish in front of him, a bacher, not a particularly big chacham, and Reb Nochem said something, and he butted in with a kasha. So Nochem said, "Wow," he says, "from this kasha I have a very stark raya." The bacher was like, "Wow, that what? That you haven't looked at the Gemara." So that was kind of a little bit extreme. But the point is, you have to get a sense of, and I'll tell another story. Apropos, I guess this is part of the Mirah Chinuch. Reb Nochem used to say Motzei Shabbos Chabura on the Inyanim. It was like he took the sugya of the week and it could be 2-3 hours going through like the mahalchim that he felt were mahalchim to consider, why certain ones. In a certain sense, they were a backdrop for the Shir Kloli. The Shir Kloli was Sunday 45 minutes, very sharp, very quick, very pointed. But in Motzei Shabbos, you're able to discuss much broader and go back and forth. It was a very different type of. It became very popular at Bachim and Chevron. In Mir, the mahalach was you sat and listened, and at Shir Kloli, afterwards, people would come over and ask and talk. But during Shir Kloli, it was absolutely quiet. In the Blat Shir, but also it was in Chevron Yeshiva. It was always like the Yeshiva would say something, and at Shir Kloli, everybody would get up and jump and yell and scream and this and that and chulu chulu. Different ways. So, and Yevamos man must have been 72, I guess. That's when. So a lot of Chevron Bachim started coming. Motzei Shabbos to Chabura and so on. They were learning Yevamos also, and Nachum Yevamos. So Nachum started talking, and a bacher jumps up and hacks. Nachum looked at him and said, he told him, I did a lot of thinking before I said what I'm saying. How about you do some thinking before you ask? But the point is, a sugya is a sugya. So let's get down the basics. To stop on one line and ask, when we don't begin to have the structure of it. So that's something. The problem is when you're saying shir, usually in most places the style is that the Rebbe Rosh Yeshiva says, he just says the points that he wants to make. So I'll say 3 words and say defect makasha. That's meant to be after you have it down. You could repeat the Shagvatari backwards and forwards. And now we're raising points. But to start that, and that's something that, unfortunately, we become very sloppy with that. And that's something that yes, I cannot imagine someone disagree with that. Right.
The shir is not a daf yomi shir. They're a shiva shir. That's a distinction, really, between the shir.
Now, and the was Reb Nachum read every word. Gemara Shitaisis, they never skipped. He read, put it in its place. Reb Shari does the same thing. Different styles. They were very conscious of a blotcher style. But at the end of the day, you're still not reading all the Gemara, finishing its net. That's what a bacher should have done first. You should go through the sugya, know the Gemara. And it's true you can read it once and know the taich, but to really have the back and forth arguments, I cannot imagine anyone would disagree with that.
Yeah, to quote from the book where you say, Sometimes the Bacher presents a Chakira as soon as he sees the first words of the Gemara, but Lamdus is meant to explain the facts of the Sugya, not vice versa. Until he clearly understands the facts of the Sugya, his Chakira is idle speculation. He needs to really understand. And so the book is, and this part of the book is kind of a guide to explaining how you have to go through the Sugya, read the Sugya, understand the Shakavataya, then go through Rashi. What does Rashi want? Why is Rashi asking it? Why is he explaining this? What does Tosfos do? Why is Tosfos asking this? What's Tosfos Bavarning here? What's he trying to answer? Really working through what the Mahalach is before you get up to the Brisker Rav, Reb Chaim, before you're getting up to the Lamdas, and even the Rishonim, really working through the Sugya, and that's something. And then you get to Lamdas, which is something also you explain. You work through being Medayik, taking other sources, being Masber, Akasha, really working through the Sugya. And this is an overall approach that you kind of explain in the book, as well as something of mastering a shtickle Torah, which is what you say. And what is it, mastering a shtickle Torah, referring to when a bacher has to give a chabura, the bacher has to say something, or this is just, even when the bacher is learning the ksais or the avamum or the bacher himself by first seder, he should be able to say it over clearly, that he should have a firm grasp on it after he's finished.
Right, and let's. I make this point in how maybe to learn shtickle. The problem with shtickle Torah is, if you hear about mitzvah boy recited shtickle Torah beautifully, so he says this, and there was a kasha here, there was a kasha there, and there's teretz here, and teretz there, and he brought right from there. But if you ask him, okay, sit back now, what was the point that was nischadish in the shtickle Torah? What were the, as opposed to what? How did one learn other than that? What is it that forced him to learn like that? Many Bachar will have a hard time, so they can't sit back and say to themselves, and so they don't really. They can repeat it and they sort of know what it is, but to understand it means to sit back and be able to speak about it. The point that I'm making is this, as opposed to the way one will approach it. What is it that pushed him so strongly to go that direction? Why? And which of the rayas were his strong rayas? Where is it mashal not like that? And so on. To be able to understand it intelligently means not that I follow the script, but the other way around. I can take a bird's eye view of it and give it over.
Yeah, and to that extent, you explain in the book the proper way, the step-by-step for a bacher to compose the shtickle Torah and to whether it's chabura, and to compose it and to understand what he's saying.
Correct. The person know what he's saying, and he should be able to he should understand the elements of it, the parts and the pieces of it. Is he being maser machlokas? Is he trying to say a pshat that he thinks everyone has to subscribe to? How strong is the raya is bringing? To be able to take a bird's eye view instead of just being caught up with the rhythm of it.
What about learning Bekiyas?
That when somebody learns not thinking, the Gemara says to chant it like it's kind of a, and he says this, and this. Like it becomes like a zemer instead of a. The Gemara uses that lashon when the Gemara talks about mindless repetition. Yeah, what were you asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what about learning Bekiyas? This is something some yeshivas have a greater emphasis than others, especially Ben Astarim, Bachram should do, and outside of the standard yeshiva first and second seder. But what do we even mean by learning Bekiyas? Is that just Gemara Rashi, or is that something else? What does that mean? And what about Bekiyas? Is there a specific kind of emphasis that a Bachar should place, or it depends on the yeshiva?
So, well, obviously, I'm not, every Bachar needs to fit into the framework of his yeshiva. And first and foremost, I make this point again and again, it's his Rabbeim's Hadracha. But what is Bekiyas? How much time you give to it and how many blood is irrelevant. The two things that are relevant is how clear is it to you and how well is the retention of it. In other words, if the sugya is just, I can maybe repeat, he asked, he answered, yes, but you don't have a bird's eye view of the ongoing machlekes, the pshat, the makar, you don't have it, and you don't know it. I bring a story where Rav Yashiv told somebody, asking to limit some. He said, whatever it is, it needs to be clear. You need to be able to sit down, and when you're talking about the Inyan, you know what the Gemara said about it. It means learning it through a lot more times than you think. A bacher who's good at teaching once, twice, three times, it needs to be something where you can speak about it very clearly. If I can give a simple mashal, a person comes to a new town, he's bewildered. Some people pick up not bad, and some people make simanim. You walk the street until you get to that tree over there, then you make the left, and it's the first right after. Fine, that's a workable siman. But somebody who lives in a town, he feels it. He doesn't need simanim, he feels it. A person who's learned through enough times where he's comfortable, it's like he feels he knows it and understands it. That's what it's about. So what pace and how much and what hours and so on, that's each yeshiva has its own halchim. That's call it. But what it means knowing something clear with retention so that you can use the information and have the information a reasonable amount of time.
And generally, that's the core of the book, as you've said it a bunch of times, that the book is each yeshiva has its own style, and you're not coming to tell the yeshiva what to do or tell the bacher what to do. You're just these globally speaking, certain global, whether explaining concepts like Iya and Bekias, and also just generally speaking, general rules.
Right.
So another thing, and this really also differs yeshiva by yeshiva, but just to speak to it globally, is learning Chumash, learning mussar, and learning halacha. And there's really three separate things. You can take them separately, and what those mean for a bacher. And is there a global kind of, not a requirement, but kind of a floor that a bacher should be doing of those three different things?
So, if I can, and again, I think a lot of it, I hope, comes across in the book. Halacha is a necessity for every single person. It's hard for me to imagine that yeshiva can tell a bacher not to learn halacha, that he should be over Averis all the time. By default, I mean, the Chafetz Chaim says so. It's not me. Chafetz Chaim says if you don't know the Shabbos, you're certainly not going to be Shem Shabbos. The issue is usually how well delineated is the time allocated for it, how much is it emphasized in speaking, and how seriously do Bacham take it. If a person is in a yeshiva where at 9:30 promptly every single person is saying Mishabura, and the Mashgiach gives you a very, very dirty look if you walk in late, and they have contests and tests and this, and everybody's saying this, you're going to do it. If you're in a place where it's kloimished, and it's not, and it's this, and it's that, that's where you have to say to yourself, yes, it could be that people are not doing it, and they're being misals in it, but how could it be? And this is so terrible. People spend years in yeshiva. If they would have spent 20 minutes a day learning it again, learning well means you learn it through a few times till you know it. You feel comfortable answering a question on it. And again, I'm not talking about an abstruse case. I'm talking about a farukta, something. I'm talking about the pashta things. And that a person who's been learning yeshiva, let's say yeshiva gdola, from the age of 18 and is getting married 5-6 years later, 4 years later, we'll make it for the crisis. We'll lower it a year. He shouldn't know basics, and it requires 20 minutes a day. I cannot imagine a yeshiva that would have a kpeda on a bacha that took 20 minutes, not one of the main storm, and let halacha. I'm sure every yeshiva has halacha seder. So to take it seriously, because you're not a shayma mitzvahs in the full sense. It's not kfi erker. You're ben Torah. You know how to learn. You're not an amaretz. You're not a yid who can barely read the chumash, and you need the rebbe to tell you what to do. You're a talmid chacham. You're ben Torah. So learn. It just requires giving it the yeshivos. As far as mussar goes, we'll leave chumash alone because chumash is a chiyuv. It's a chiyuv. If you learn halach, you're supposed to do shayim mikveh and once a week. But mussar means a person needs to feel, he has to have a source of constant inspiration. A wide range of shittas and approaches, how much time, so on and so forth. But it can't be that a person can't think in the last few months when he's really been inspired. When he sat down, if a person is inspired by learning Mesilas Yesharim, that if a person is inspired by Chavos or is inspired by learning, it doesn't make a difference. The point is that a person have a kavod mind and be inspired. And this again, this is where the mistake comes in. Baruch Hashem, today, the feeling is all I need to do is float, and I'll be a wonderful Alach Habacha. I'm not going to do any terrible affairs. I'm going to do all the mitzvah everybody does. So what I need mussar for? I'm learning in Yeshiva. I'm learning Torah. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm not doing this. I'm doing that. So, what I need mussar for? That's the problem. So a person doesn't build a pnimistika, ruchnistika world of feelings and hagoshes and cheshbon nefesh. I'm talking about another dimension. And that's why people have a hard time expressing themselves. When you ask somebody to speak about in something in Divrei Mussar Agada, unfortunately, too often you don't hear something that you feel a person has a pnimistika world. So there are enough resources today between yeshivas that have hadgash on it, between recordings of various kinds. There's so many wonderful mashpiyim that have shiurim on different things, and there's so many wonderful svarim. The point is to find something that you feel gives you a pnimistika world, a ruchnistika world, and spend some time on it. I'm not saying how much time, but consistent and meaningful time, whatever that is.
So let's start with mussar, because that's what and then I'll go back to halacha. As regards to mussar, so essentially you're saying it's a person, a bacher, this really applies to anyone, should find something that speaks to them as opposed to saying you have to do Sefer X because that's a classic. It needs to be something that speaks to them and inspires them.
Correct. And obviously the Sefer has to be a Sefer of value. In other words, it has to be that the message of the Sefer is giving is royal. Obviously, that's an obvious one. But yes, it has to speak to them, has to inspire them, and has to build a world of hagoshes, of pnimistic hagoshes, that a person is ruchnistic a world.
Now, when we say mussar to a lot of people means a lot of things get kind of mixed up. Mussar can mean classic. Mussar in the classic sense can mean machshava, hashkafa. Sometimes, the difference for not all the from the Ramchal are mussar, or the Maral is more machshava. Then there's the classic, Shari Shuva, Mr. Sharm, etc. Is it any of those, or is it more specifically a mussar sefer versus a machshava or a hashkafa type of sefer?
It depends. What does the sefer do? For instance, a sefer like Derech Hashem of the Ramchal is an incredible sefer. It's what it is a sketch of Ikrei Emunah. It's a very, very important sefer, but it's not mussar per se for a person. That's not its tenor. Maral depends on the person. Maral is a difficult sefer for a Bach to learn, but for some people, the Maral opened up a ruchnistika world, and Ramesh Shapiro's and Rav Hutner's, I would say, most basic bread and butter was the Maral. And it built an entire world. It wasn't just, it wasn't sort of ideas. It was ideas that really motivate a person. So it really depends. So a sefer like the Derech Hashem, its tachlis is a different tachlis, and it's a very important sefer, but it's not taking the place of it. Chavos Havos is a sefer whose tachlis is to build pnimistika, ruchnistic world of a person, and people are different in terms of what works for them.
Now, going back to halacha, but in a similar vein, a similar type of thing, you mentioned halacha, and when I was in Philly, we had halacha seder every morning. We were supposed to go learn halacha, but when it comes to halacha, is that something also that really depends on the sefer? I think Bochurim, and not even Bochurim, everyone today is kind of trained. They learn Mishnah Berurah, but I personally, I always learned the Aruch HaShulchan and found it to be really gives you the sugya. It's very clear. This is something you talk about in the sefer, not against Chavetz Chaim, but there's the Mishnah Berurah, you have Chai Adam, you have this Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is a little different. You have Aruch HaShulchan. Is there a sefer maybe a bacher should try? Should the standard be the Mishnah Berurah, or should it be something else, or it should be what speaks to them of those Sfarim?
So the word speaks to them. If halacha is supposed to speak at you, not to you, but I would say the sefer that presents to a bacha the halacha most clearly in a way that he has it is the sefer to learn. Now, you bear in mind that in particular areas in Psak Halacha, Mishmur has become the sort of the default setting. But to learn, and like I point out in the book, the Mishmur is a very difficult sefer to learn. The Mechaber is not very structured. Doesn't supply much background information, and Mishmur will sometimes in the middle of the simon have to give the background information that very rarely does it give a hakdama. So Aruch HaShulchan does approach a sugya like that. So learning whatever sefer gives you the sense of structure, on the very halachal ma'aseh, it's kedai to refer back to Mishnah Berurah and see what his psak is. They've put out Aruch HaShulchan with Brisker Rav. Some people worked, some people, but that's what it is. They've put out Chai Adam, that's fine, and so on.
What I meant by stylistically, speaking to a person, I mean more like stylistically, what speaks to a person.
Yes.
Not, of course, it's halacha, but also a story. I remember I asked Rav Shlomo Kamenetsky when I was in Philly. I said about which sefer, and I learned Aruch HaShulchan. I found it to be very clear and enjoyed it. And I asked Rav Shlomo. Rav Shlomo said, "You're a litvak. Mishnah Berurah, Chai Adam, Aruch HaShulchan. Whoever's the most makel, you can go with." I still remember that's what he told me. So it's as I said, there's a Piskim Mishnah Berurah on the Isvahadar one. There's also on the Chai Adam, and there's various farim.
Right.
And the Mishnah Berurah, I remember myself when I was in Beis Shalom in Kol doing Masechtas Beitza, we went through the sugya and then went to Mishnah Berurah. He's amazing. But when you're not doing the sugya, when you're just pulling out the halacha, sometimes it's harder. Aruch HaShulchan really spoon feeds you the entire sugya with the minhag, with the halacha, and he gives you everything. So sometimes
there's also, and again, I suggest this book. There are today recordings of people who presented extremely masterfully, so that you can listen and get a hakdama. You can get a sense of the big picture, and then you could go back again and look at small print. But like upon him getting it in a way that's structured that you can actually know the halacha from it is vital. I can't see how not.
Yeah. So about Chumash, as you mentioned, you have to do Shnai Mikra V'Echad Paragon. But what about something more for a Bacher? Even Chumash Rashi, Chumash Ramban, or something else on Chumash, on the weekly parsha? Is that something that a Bacher should be trying to do?
So let's go slowly. The Chumash Rashi part is obviously very important, but that people should try to understand your. The problem is we go back to our young years in Cheder, and whatever the Rashi just comes back again. It's not you don't learn it with fresh eyes. It's an issue. In terms of Sfarim, so I would be wary of going too far afield. Ramban is a very chashuv, is the chashuv piece. Like I write that also. So if a person can set aside some time to learn how to learn Rambans and to get down the main yeshivos, Ramban is very, very chashuv. That's a mila. But this is an area where I would say, if the ruach of the yeshiva is not there particularly, even though it's hard to believe that on a Friday night, on a long Friday night, when people are, some must be learning, some are not, that to learn an hour Ramban on the parsha would be such a big thing. But if a person is getting his mussar from someplace, he's getting some yesayistic hashkafas from another sefer. I think the Ramban is in a mood, but I can't push it as strongly as the other things.
Yeah, I remember I was again in Philly. We had a 2.5 hour Chumash Seder. There was an emphasis definitely that the Bochurim should sit themselves and learn.
Chumash Seder? When?
There was a Chumash. So in the summer, it definitely was. I think. I'm trying to remember, we had after Mincha, before Ma'ariv. I think Mincha was always 6:30, if I remember correctly, and then there was a Chumash Seder, and then Ma'ariv Bizman. Really? I think it was always the Chumash Seder. And I think during the winter it was at night. It was considered, whether everyone actually sat and went through all the Chumash, or whether I think it was whatever you wanted to do, Ramban, or whether it was Shnai Mikra, or whatever you did. Officially, it was Chumash Seder in Yeshiva. Wow. They had halacha, they still do. There's a halacha Seder in the morning, and then there's mussar Seder after second Seder before supper. There's a mussar Seder. So they have all these kind of things. Something I was, I had the chinuch that this is what I had as well. So another thing that you discuss in the book, besides these, all you discuss is also besides what we've been discussing till now is kind of the substance of learning, the process of learning. What about the process, whether that's visualization, talking it out, learning with a chavrusa? This is something that's very important in yeshiva. What about all those things, the actual process itself of the learning, as opposed to just the substance?
So what about what point do you want to address as far as that goes?
We can start with it simply as the importance of learning with a chavrusa, especially as opposed to someone learning by themselves. Or
so I guess of the things I think that need the most chizuk is the verbalization that learning should never be something that's just that you're quiet and silent. It's when you speak out something, it is so much more real, and it leaves such a different impression. So obviously, when you want to think through something, you sometimes need to be quiet and think through it. But learning, the actual act of learning a sugya, if you have to speaking it out loud is something that's extremely. And out loud means speaking out loud, and in a way where you say out the full sentence. This is the case that the Gemara is talking about. Rava asks on it. If this is true, then wouldn't this be? Wouldn't that be? It's so much. It's like going from 2 dimensions to 3, 4 dimensions, and that I think is a critical piece in helping people really get a handle on learning and become immersed in learning.
Now, something that's really specific, I mean, this could apply to anyone, but especially for a bacher, and you do talk about this, is learning with a weaker bacher. As bacher is looking by chavrusa tumult, and maybe there's a distinction here between first and second seder, night seder, and opposed to like a Shabbos seder once a week or a ben asdarim seder. But should a bacher, is his achrayus, and should he be looking to learn with a weaker bacher, or only someone on his level or better for him?
So it's nuanced in the following ways. If it's somebody that he's not going to learn, let's say somebody's unfortunately struggling and he's not going to go and snap, that needs a real reason why he should do it. It'll really severely impact you if you have a full seder learning with somebody who's not there or whatever it is. But if it's somebody that you need to explain it more, the person hops slower than you, but is listening, then a lot of times it becomes a big advantage. You really are forcing yourself to spell out something, to say it, to bring it out, and I think it helps the people themselves. It helps the stronger bacher. I don't know. I once heard Rav Yechezkel that he said that he told the bacher the reason he was matzliach so much was because he learned with weaker bachim, and the reason why Rebbe Yeshua was matzliach even more was because he learned with the weakest bachim. True, not true. I just heard if somebody wasn't. But the point is, it brings out a lot. And besides the fact, in terms of working on midas, I mean, it's not easy to work on midas in yeshiva. You're sitting and learning. So yes, you get up, you get the guy a glass of water, but here, to learn with somebody who is weaker, where you're not giving off vibes that you're doing him a favor, or you're the gadlador, or who knows what, but you learn together with somebody, it's a crowning achievement. And the truth is, if you really want to be Marbet's Torah someday, it's probably the best preparation. You're there for the other person. You treat the other person with respect, and so on. So obviously the person is so much weaker that you can't do anything. But even after you could do 10% less going off into very chashuv raid, but it's forcing you to explain the rishon much better to this person. You're usually probably doing yourself a favor.
Now, what about writing? This is not something necessarily that yeshivas teach, certainly, but how much emphasis should a bacher place on writing, whether it's writing his own chedushim, writing just a kitzur, a summation of the shir for himself to get clarity? What about writing?
So writing, unfortunately, is a lost art. I wouldn't say art; it's lost, and to the detriment of everyone. First of all, I'll tell you, when I came to the Mir Yeshiva, I was a very young boy. My Rebbe, Rav Yechezkel Levenstein, he felt that would be, he gave me a few choices, and I think he sort of guided me that was probably the place that would be suitable, Baruch Hashem. And he gave me two pieces of advice when I came there. And one of them was to have a seder to write down once a week any chidushim I came up with. Now, I was very young and I listened, but I mean, looking back, I don't know if you have to be going as what I wrote. It's kind of what a 70-year-old bacher would write. But at the end of his man, I felt very special. I had a whole notebook filled with things. He told me, he said, even if after you finish writing it, you realize it's wrong, don't cross it out. Add on to it. That now that I thought of this and this, it can't be because of this and this. And it's something that sort of gives a person a sense of accomplishment that is real. Because we sit in yeshivos, most of the learning is not bikiyas. We don't count the blot. We don't make a cheshbon how much we memorized. So the only tangible marker that we have is what we mechadesh, what we ma'ayin, so on. So writing it down is, I know in the Mir, I saw my nephew Reb Lezer Shlita, it has this thing where if you submit your chidushim, they will type it up for free and bind it, kind of and I've seen Bochurim that it made them, wow, this is what I accomplished. It's amazing. 2, it forces you to think about what you're saying. Like we said before about Torah, what's the point? Am I straying? Is this really a riot to it? Why am I adding this? When you talk, you can spread out all over the place and say things like orcha, this and that. When you're writing, it forces a certain sense of structure on you. It forces you to clarify the words because you can't use your hands and motions to sort of help language. You have to put it in words. So it's something that I think would be a tremendous tool. It also teach people to write Hebrew. People don't know it. People, it's embarrassing sounds the way people write. So doing that, I think, is a very, very, it's an incredible tool for solidifying your learning and clarifying it and having a sense of real accomplishment.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the place to talk about it, but definitely people don't know how to write, and this is not something that's really taught, unfortunately, today. It's kind of a lost art, and it's really important, but that's a kind of a separate thing. But we're almost an hour in, and I'm sure listeners are wondering, well, the probably part that they thought when they heard about a book for Bochurim is part 2 of the book, building upwards, especially when it comes to all the various nisyonos and things that always, the Bochurim always had nisyonos. You read any memoirs, for the
right.
Bochurim and yeshiva in Europe, this is not a new thing.
It's usually the people who had the nisyonos that once wrote the memoirs. So there's a correlation between the two. The Bochurim who sat kind of very sweet in the corner usually didn't write memoirs. So okay, but that's a side point.
Absolutely, but definitely the point was that there always was, and yes, there are today. There really are, and there's different distractions, and whatever those distractions are. And this is something that you do discuss in the book, and there's a lot to get into and to mention. And this is something that, and especially this goes back to also some of it, even there, it's constantly changing, as we were discussing earlier, that now there's so many more in-town, quote-unquote, yeshivas, and so there's even more distractions. And so not every distraction necessarily is a most horrible thing. Sometimes you have distractions that are, quote-unquote, kosher, but they're still distractions. They're still shter bacher and his learning. But this is something that you talk about. So let's talk about kind of the classics. Let's jump right into something you discussed: smoking, drinking, kind of the classics thing that face teenagers and Bochurim that come up.
So let me preface it. First of all, I think what's important about discussing these topics is as follows. One, mussar shmuzim that are given tend to address a problem, an acute problem, in a way that we're trying to get results. So let's say the Bochurim are over drinking, whatever, it's Bochurim are drunk. So somebody finds out about it, and someone said, I saw a bunch of Bochurim dead, dead drunk. Just painting an imaginary scene. So a typical response will be a very sharp shmooze, outlining all the Gehennims and Isurim and things about drinking. That's where how it comes in. Or anything, mussar, shmuzin tend to deal with acute problems that cropped up, and they're addressed by making a very powerful and impassionate case why it's wrong, us, and so on and so forth. But there's a problem with it. Most people will not respond well with. So let's give a mashal. Imagine somebody has a I don't know, some sort of blister on his thumb, on his toe, and it hurts terribly. So a guy comes with some sort of cream that sort of deadens the pain, maybe some sort of Band-Aid, and he puts it on and it helps. But the problem is that the shoe is too tight. So as soon as he takes it off, it's going to come back again because we haven't addressed the root of it and we don't understand it. Understanding so there's certainly is room when you're dealing with a serious issue or a chronic issue to be very forceful and strong and use the words as a cudgel to get people to do what's right. That's the tachlis of mussar. But if you really want to address an issue, it has to be addressed in a way where we understand what's driving me in a certain place. How does one move beyond it? Why should a person move beyond it? And so on. So we're talking about drinking. So the problem is we're going to start finding the nissa here and nissa there. Understand what drives you. Why is it so enjoyable? What's the fun behind it? What are the issues? What's the toll it's taking on you? How do you move on past it? A lot more in terms of understanding the big picture and how to get there, as opposed to just as opposed to just bear down. And so I try to do. Listen, everyone was a bacha once upon a time, and did this, did that, the other thing. Understand why it's not appropriate. What is it that pushes you to it? How is it you stay away from it, and so on. So at least if it's addressed that way, a person has a sort of a tools and understandings to be able to move forward.
Yeah, and drinking, you have a whole chapter talking about drinking. Also smoking, I mean, and just smoking, a question is, there is a distinction between a bacher smoking and between vaping, which is something that's kind of become more and more popular today.
So again, it has the criteria for, it's not the name of the problem. The problems are, in general, am I getting drawn into something which is becoming a habit that I can't shake? Is it something that is making a dent on my health, on my occupation with learning? Those are the issues. So, if it becomes popular to drink, I don't know, a fizzy lemon drink, I'm just picking something silly. So I need to ask myself, is it worth doing something about it? I need to ask myself the certain questions. Is it drawing me into another world? Is it something that becomes a habit that I can't shake? Is there a problem with my health? Is there something coarse or vulgar about it? Those are the issues that a person needs to ask himself and appropriately address it.
What about for a parent? I know this book is for bacher, but if there's parents listening, how does a parent deal with a bacher that's smoking or vaping or drinking? Is it something? Is it just across the line, just something that they do? Does it depend if there's and this also goes, it depends if it's a starke bacher and this is their one outlet? Is there a distinction there to be made or not?
So the answer is there's a whole, when you're talking about a parent, there's a whole new dimension here. So I do believe knowing and understanding what's right and what's good and so on is always good. If this is what's appropriate for bacher, indeed. So obviously knowing and understanding it. But I think for a parent, the following is correct. You need to understand the different roles you have when you have a young child, a teenager, and a post-teenager. Those are very, very different roles as a parent. Your job is to ensure that your child becomes Yerei Shemayim, a Ben Torah, all of the above. But the role is very different. A parent of a young child under bar mitzvah generally speaking, the child's expecting the parent to run their life and doing it in a way that's obviously smart and appropriate and so on. It's much more hands-on, directed from top. A child passed by mitzvah, so on, begins to start to become independent, wanting virtually independent, becomes a teenager, has all that. It's not that your obligation to set him right is good, but how do you set him right? As the older a child gets, the less bossing around works. A lot more on the dealing with Chachma. Sending him to a place that resonates with you in terms of the chinuch. Having intelligent conversations. You have a tremendous effect when you speak and explain what you think is right. Most of the time, if it's a teenager, he'll probably not listen on the spot. Obviously it depends on the diagram. The teenager depends on the diagram. The hertz. But that's not the point. If you're sincere, if what you said is sincere, what you live by, when the time comes and he matures, this will be there. And that's why your chinuch is a lot more to talk and discuss and to explain what's right. And then allow that to percolate. It takes more patience, but it's not going to work otherwise. You can force a teenager maybe to do what you want to do if you have enough leverage, but you're not really changing him, and that's counterproductive. You want him to begin to understand that this is wrong and that's wrong.
Another area that you discuss in the book, and this is another probably general teenage issue, is dealing with, as you call, taivan arayas. And dealing with brachim. So that's, I guess, both ends of things. We're at, whether the audience here is whoever the audience is, we're dealing with both ends to the, as you discuss in the book, for the bachrim and also for parents to deal with bachrim. It's the same kind of as I asked about drinking and smoking.
Right. It's the same thing. You need to understand that, to have an understanding of the big picture, understanding where it is that you want to direct a child to, so that the way they deal with it is appropriate. And again, speaking about what's good and what's right and so on. If a child hears from a parent words that are sincere about what kedusha is and what this and what that is, without somebody accusing them or pushing against the wall and saying, tell me the truth, did you do this or that or the other thing, it'll have the effect on the person much, much more. I want to say, if there's a Gemara that says, a person should say, a person has to say Erev Shabbos Mashgiach and so on. So Rav Yechezkel said he should say it b'nichusa ke'echad kabelinu. Words can have two effects. I can use words as a battering ram. Either if I have a power over somebody, if I'm somebody's boss and he's dependent on me, I can tell him, you do this or you're fired, or I won't give you this or that. You can use words to shame somebody, and when the person is just overwhelmed. You can get a person to do something, but there's no lekablinhu. He's not accepting it. What'll happen is, if you do it hard enough, long enough, what'll happen is, when he gets old enough, he'll toss it out the window and say, my father was old school, my father was mean, my father was nasty. If this is sitkas, I want to have no part of it. There's a lot of ways of expressing that resentment. If you want kehechad lekabelinhu, that the person be makabel the words, then it has to be A, dvarim that yotzim min halev, and B, something that was said b'nichusa. When I'm yelling at somebody, I'm attacking somebody. When you attack somebody, the initial reaction is to hold up your hands and to push back. If somebody tells me shab mussar, if someone could come to me and tell me I'm not doing X, Y, Z, I can tell you the first four thoughts I'm thinking. First of all, you yourself are not such a big tzaddik. Secondly, you don't know me. Third of all, where'd you hear this lashon hara? Fourth of all, I have my cheshbonis, and I can come up with a lot more. But if somebody cares about me, is thoughtful and sincere, and he's mashpia, at some point I'll say to myself, you know what? I got to do this or that. So it's certainly with older children. what you want is, you don't want him to do it now once, twice, three times. You want keher de kablinhu, that it go in and become absorbed. And nichus is the way that it happens.
The next part that you talked about is addictive behavior and technology. And you make the point, which is that sometimes it gets lost. And today, with all the technology and various issues with technology, sometimes we think, or maybe what's being pushed always, that you get a filter and it's fine. And it's not always the case. There's especially with Bochurim, that there are so many things. You get addictive behavior with the smartphones and various technology, like unkosher sites, quote unquote, whether, those may have Lashon Hara and things like that, but you get stuck endlessly just scrolling and time wasting and sucking you in, addicting the Bocher, the person, and taking them away from learning.
Yes, to me, by us in Yeshiva, the thing over the years, the thing we're marked with the most, the filters we put on are time. It's to me that everything else pales in terms of lahavdil. It's the shkius, the absorption, immersion in it, that destroys any chance of building a ben Torah. The time for it, and again, as I'm a believer that Bacha should take the initiative, and to sit down and say to yourself, where does my time go? Not when I'm holding the phone or the device or the tablet in my hand. But I need to sit down and say to myself, over a week, where does my time go? I learn X amount, fine. This time I need X amount of downtime. Okay, if it's reasonable, it's reasonable. But how much time do I spend? I mean, to me, the inane video games like the Tetris, I don't know today what in my days was, Tetris was the but to sit hour after hour after hour. I once had a fascinating conversation. I was in an El Al flight, and a stewardess was sitting next to us. I was sitting with my wife, and she was, she had that jump seat or whatever it was. And I asked her about the long flights from Eretz Yisrael to America during the daytime, when it's like 12 hours a day. It's like after difficult flights, these used to be the worst. So she said this was the worst flight. 12, 13 hours with people that are bored out of their minds, running up and down, constantly wanting to eat. It was a nightmare. It was the worst shift. She said, since the time that devices have become frequent, she said, it's amazing. People sit 12 hours glued to their backs. I have to shake them and say, you must drink something because you'll dehydrate. That's what she said. She said, it's like dead. It's like a morgue. To me, that's the biggest enemy to steiging, that a person just learns to veg out. And I think, if a person wants to be makabel things on himself, like comes Elul, comes Hashem Kippur, comes a week short. So I assume most of the audiences are people that are mostly yeshiva, don't have smartphones. Many, I don't know the audience, but any time spent aimless mindset. Now, if a person feels he needs an hour a day of chilling out and relaxing, and he does it by sitting and schmoozing something, or he's on the phone for an hour, that's fine. It's a decision beforehand that an hour a day of being on the phone is what gives me my relaxation. It's fair. As long as he did it with his das, he made a decision, he could reconsider it. But when it becomes something, the key is that if I decide 1 hour, when the clock turns, whatever it is, I stop. That's my avodah. My avodah is to stop on a dime. That's my avodah. And that's key. So, except for maybe farm chatter, that's something a person should be mehaded to keep listening to, because that's kuloi dvarim tovim. But other than that, you disagree with Nachi or
No, not at all. But we have these different levels of history and svarim. Exactly. I mean, that gets to what I did want to ask about other outlets, like listening to various. Today, you have podcasts, things you can listen to, whether it's a shiur or even like something like this, even a history with a professor. You can listen to history of various historical topics and different things like that. What about a bacher because I do know I've received messages from Bochurim, even teenage Bochurim and Mesifta Bochurim and Beis Medrash Bochurim listen to podcasts. Not only this podcast, other ones listening to Shiurim. I know Rav Aharon, you give his history also Shiurim. What about Bochurim having that as an outlet?
So again, as long as a person sits down, the criteria for the outlet should be as follows: one, how much time do I need being partial parsha? And it varies. They're more, and as long as a person. Two, what's important is how much will it absorb me? One of my children asked me, was a long time ago, this is pre devices, reading was the big thing. Obviously, and this boy was an avid reader. He was about, I don't know, must have been 10 years old. He asked me about reading fiction. So I told him it has value if it relaxes you, and you need that. Its problem is if you become absorbed in it, so that you can't get out of it, or it fills your mind and so on. So then it becomes a problem. So the second criteria is how much is it imshach basrayu? Can I enjoy it and then move on, or I become obsessed with it, like sports, or spectator sport, where it becomes kehem chayenu v'archimenu. That becomes a problem. Three. Obviously, choosing different activities, something that has value. History has value as opposed to playing a mindless game. You also have to be careful when it comes to things like history and so on. Who's the person presenting it? It's history is a mixture of hopefully facts, and somebody's tying it together. There's no such thing as a start having an agenda. Everybody has an agenda. Everybody has a certain set mind. And some people are consciously pushing the agenda and eliminating facts that don't fit them, and inventing facts that do fit. That's an extreme, and that's obviously terrible. But then you have people that, subconsciously, if the person is not Yirei Shamayim, then you have to ask yourself really hard and well if it's something that, is the person subconsciously feeding you something that you shouldn't. That's something a person should ask somebody who understands about these things.
I was always told history is his story. So it's always told.
Yes, it's very, very true. And it's more. I want to tell you, it comes with a mindset. Somebody who grew up in yeshiva and he saw Rabbanim and this, and he felt that he knows people are chasronis, but he understands the kedusha and understands this. I'll tell you a story. I heard this just this summer. I was at Israel and I met with somebody. He's a Datilumi historian. Very high academic person, very accomplished, and he's very erlich, very sincere, very straightforward. So we're talking about how, when you say things orally, you don't have the facts. But when you quote things, when you have printed some books like historical record, you're making it, and a lot of times you don't get the whole story. And he told me a fascinating story. He said he was at a conference at some point, and there was a woman doing a presentation about the Chazon Ish. And she had tons of quotations from his Sfarim, and she drew a picture of him as being a very severe, humorless, unkind person. That was the picture she drew. And somebody in the audience stood up and said, "Lady, I knew the Chazon Ish personally, and he was nothing like you described him. You have no idea what you're talking about." And it's true. So it has a lot to do with understanding. That's why you have to take it gingerly. So on the one hand, certainly things are. It's a of the activities we can do. It certainly is it's a positive. It's value, but you have to be very, very careful. Who's presenting it and what his bias is.
Yeah, and you definitely have to be careful from cherry picking and quotations and things like that. But something that I have learned from reading academic history and academics is that you also do want to rely on sources, and that goes both ways. It cuts both ways. Don't take any historian at their word. You want to look up, find the actual source, and look it up and see what they say. So if it doesn't have sources, it's really real drawback, because whichever way, if it's right or left, you're not going to know. There's no who says.
I try very hard when I quote. I tell them the Rambam lived 800 years ago. How do I know anything about it? Where am I getting from? And somebody 400 years later wrote something. How did he get about it? the only makairos that really make sense are either the person himself, the contemporaries that wrote about him. Sometimes you have a dur to later family who has a very close, but somebody wrote a storybook in I don't know 1600 about the Rama. I don't know, without letting me know anything, where, what, when. I don't know. You have to learn to take these things with a lot of grains of salt. There's a Yavitz. I guess we got off topic a bit, but the Yavitz, it's in Migdalos. It's a sort of a mussar sefer from Rav Yechezkel. He writes that believing Narishkeiten is an Avizraya Avodah. It's sort of he says it's since HaKadosh Baruch Hu was emes, a person that swallows shkorim about other things. It's lacking. It's not something a person should ask himself. I'll tell you, apropos my father, Benish Finkel, once picked up. He wasn't from the door that read books and so on. Somebody left a biography book in the house or something like that. He opened up, took a quick look at a page, and said it's a lie, the whole thing. So, So he said, it says that he looked like a malach. He says, did he ever see what a malach looks like? Like, how does the biographer know? What does it mean to look like a malach? He doesn't, and his point was he understood. But his point was, once you start writing flowery from your imagination, then your imagination has nothing to do with the Metzias.
The only malach quote that comes to mind is when the Chida writes, Magal Tov Hashem Agdolon, the Pnei Yeshua. He met the Pnei Yeshua from Mareo Kamar Malach Elikim. That was okay. The Chida says he looked like a malach.
If he died, could be choshed that he knew what a malach looks like. The biographer of Pliny, I don't know who it was.
Yeah, this is something, unfortunately. So, we did get a little off topic, but we can definitely sit and talk much more about history. But something that I do want to talk about, another two outlet questions I have for you is one that you do discuss in the book, which is following sports leagues, NFL, MLB, whatever it is, American sports, or any sport, really, and also playing sports. Two different things for both.
Right. So let's start. Physical activity and exercise is very important. That's what all the doctors say. It also helps a person air out and refresh themselves. In yeshivas in Europe, across the board, they had an hour to walk. So yes, the Masmidim used it to talk and learning, but they walked. Spaziering, walking, it's something that is a physical necessity. I can share a story that I don't know how many people know. I know it because family. When Reb Chaim Kanievsky, somebody bought him a car with a driver. So one of Reb Chaim's son-in-laws, he's the one who told me the story, we're family, went on a jihad. He said, you are killing Reb Chaim. He said, the only exercise Reb Chaim ever gets is going to places that he needs to go to, a bris, and this, that. And if you have a car, you're killing him. And he was adamant. So they suggested getting him a treadmill. And they asked Reb Chaim if he would use it. He said, as long as he can learn on the treadmill, as long as there's things for learning, he has no problem if it's healthy. And they had one. And I was there in the house. I didn't see Reb Chaim on the treadmill, that obviously not. But his son-in-law told me it's time for him now, so leave, kind of. And he set up the treadmill. So it's physical activity is the amount that a person needs. So again, in yeshivas, they had a Spazierstunde, whatever it was, that's obviously needed. If playing ball is the only way a person can do it, if it's normal, it's natural, it depends on the place. Obviously, certain yeshivas feel it's not appropriate for certain age, certain yeshivas. Yet that's a question of certain surah and mus. I have no opinion. If it's something where in Philly, I believe they did play once a week ball. I think Rebellion encouraged it. That's up to them. What the part that starts becoming, I guess, I don't want to say hashkafish, but a part is when you start creating an olam adimit. So you play. So let's give an example. Walking is exercise, makes people healthy, and it's very important. Obviously, it's on the boring side, and people like to spice it up. So playing ball creates team. I win. I out-jump the person. It's a hechetimtze to invigorate the game so that people, play a basketball game. It's a lot more for a young person. It's a lot more geschmack in a walk, and fine. But when you make a league, Lemashal, so now you're devoting a part of your mind and imagination to it. So he won this game, won that game. It's because he's better. It's a whole ASIC. A game should start when you start it and finish when you finish. Spectator sports is 100% that. All it is, a person built a world of fantasy. It's like Milo like Myrid. This guy hit a ball. This guy caught a ball. It's like this. It's a world built up of kol dimya. Someone told me that in Lakewood, when Babe Ruth died, so Reb Nosson saw the Bochurim kind of talking about it. And, it was a topic. So he told the Olam that he's going to say a hesped on Babe Ruth. So the Olam came and he said, Rabbi Say, do you know what we lost? We lost a person who could take a stick and hit a ball so far. How are we going to do without it? And that conveys the idea of it. In other words, it's now. Is it the worst of the Averis? The worst of the No. But that a person should disassociate himself, that it's something that doesn't fit the Tzura, I think very strongly so, that a person should live in it. It's an oil of meaningless dimyan. The history is real. It's things. So you can say it's a Tafel it's Paparos. But this is not in Paparos. This is called nothingness. And if a person gets caught up with the nothingness, it's the hefech of emes.
So what about something else that Bochurim engage in, which is politics? American politics, Israeli politics. Bochurim like hacking politics, reading publications, and that's really a general aside. I realize I'm mixing just reading publications as well. That's another thing. But what about talking politics and other things like that?
Okay, so let's assume. So we'll take Lashon Hara out, assuming it's not Lashon Hara. It's about the Americans. It's not about the yeshiva politics. Not about this, not that. Yeah. But I have a Hara in general. My father-in-law was an extremely astute person. When somebody made a statement, this is that, he's good for it. My shver would ask, "How do you know?" And people, because everybody knows, they said, "Okay, if everybody knows, how do they know?" And it was very much like he totally despised the type of statements. Everybody knows this, that. For somebody who's a yeshiva bocha and his chinuch in Kodesh is to look, ask what it says, think about what it says, understand is this, that, the type of impulsive, heated statements of extreme. This is this is 100% true, and whatever else says is 100% sheker, and this is the emes, and that's not emes. Yeah, on what basis? There was somebody in the mirror when I was a bacha. My brother was a bacha. He was there, and there was a person who was like a very tzidkes, real Reishamayim, an American. And he made a statement. It was like Ben Stein. He said, "Fritzes in Rehov Yafo, much worse than Times Square." So my brother tapped him on his shoulder and he said, "Pinchas, were you in Times Square by any chance?" Like to make a statement like that. What does it mean? That those statements. Like, ask yourself, what are the facts that I know? Where am I getting it from? What's the norm? It's something that you would feel that somebody who's oisik all day being mevar things stuff would be more thoughtful. The type of childish teenage thing should, okay, teenager is a teenager, a child's a child, but an adult you would expect them to. I assume any bardas when he sees a periodical paper, newspaper, anything that has very extreme views that only this is emes, and only the Democrats are emes, only Republicans are emes, only this is emes, on that's emes, everything else is shaken, everything's bad and everything's good. You say to yourself, I'm sure they mean it, but I'm not quite sure that this is a very objective evaluation. And if real big situations don't demand thinking, different studying and understanding, and this and that. I think there's a certain lack of. It should be natural that a person becomes has more gravitas and more thoughtfulness about big issues.
And what about Bochurim, you as an outlet, reading various publications and spending time with them?
There's the first question is, are there halach issues? Two, are there, so, it depends on the pictures and whatever it is. Two, is there an imshach basrayu to it? Is it something that will suck me in and I'll be into it fully? Am I being influenced by any one particular person? Is somebody has an agenda, and this is a kli of his to I don't know. Those are questions a person needs to ask himself and see.
So now I think we can move past that kind of section, but other type of nisyanis, which are really in this, which is things that are like jealousy, smugness, and those type of things. But before that, something that's very important, and you discuss it here at this point in the book, so let's get to here, is that striving for godless. And you talk about a story of a graduation, his graduation that you saw, and this is something that we often say, and you often hear people give a bracha like this. You have a bracha like your son, whoever, they tell the bracha, you should grow up to be the gadol hadar. And like that's the godless, the only godless that we're striving for. And you could say over that story also is basically that. And what kind of godless should a bacher be striving for?
So the first thing is, part of what I guess mussar should be a description. Godless is an internal quality. Sometimes you meet a person, not known, So the stuff that you see on the posters are posters. If you want it, sometimes you want to be that because you want your face on a poster. I don't. That's a katnus. But a person. What does it mean? A big person. A person who is mevater on something in a way. A person who's quiet. A person who's refined. A person who's depth. A person who's thinking of other people. These are qualities that a person rises above instincts. So, and being able to point out, and that's why reading and seeing stories about people that weren't famous, what you can focus on the meisim. This is a big meisa. This is something that has in itself nobility. A person who's learning is clear and knows so much, and these are tunis that you want to pick up and understand that this is what I want. And the problem is that the word gadol hadar always comes. Why gadol hadar? I want to be a big person, and big person means a quality, and part of the experience you should be the mechanech person to see what big people. I was zeichet in yeshiva, came in 1970. So you had Reb Nachum and Reb Chaim and Shver. So these were people that acknowledged big Rosh Yeshivas and so on and so forth. But there were so many big people sitting in the room. And they didn't have official titles. But Reb Mandlatik, Reb Chaim Kamil, Reb Shul Trovitz, others, there were people that you said, wow, these are big people. They're fanem, they're anova. Their simplicity, their ability to lift themselves above their feelings of jealousy, of this, of that. It just everything about them. They live in a different world, and to be able to appreciate that, it had nothing to do. They didn't have newspaper write-ups. They didn't have pictures. Nobody referred to Gadol Hador. They referred to him as Chaim, Mendel, this. But you felt a giant is there when you saw the persons meisim. So we were fortunate. We had dugmos. We had dugmos of big people, not people that were famous people, but big people, and that's the big difference. We equate famous and big, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, that is something that gets done today. Also, something I don't recall if you get into is money and money equals status. Gvirim equals status.
Okay.
It's something that sometimes Bochurim talk about, and maybe that's something that are striving for.
You know what? The problem is not what Bochurim talk about. The problem is what you don't talk about. In other words, every teenager is a work in progress. They have their natures, they have their personality, and it's bubbling and so on. The excesses is fine so long as something is brewing inside that will one day mature, and there'll be a story of a big person.
Now, what about jealousy, Bacher being jealous, and balancing that? Because really, it's a balancing, goes hand in hand with smugness.
So the first thing is, and all these midas, I like I said before, I think it's important that we understand this is normal, this is natural. When the mussar starts with how terrible it is, if a Rebbe says to me, it's unthinkable to be jealous, so what does it leave me? Either I'll pretend not to be jealous, or I'll say, I guess I'm hopeless. I'm like the worst Bacher ever set foot in the yeshiva. So once I'm not getting a Gan Eden here, I might as well enjoy life. So that's not, the picture has to be, jealousy is it's a very intrinsic part of us. It's a process. Don't think, when you start thinking of it evil, so I have this little devil inside me who's jealous, and it's a human being starts the life as being jealous. A child is very jealous of other children. A baby, his kid brother's born, or his kid sister's born, they can't stop following him around and being very annoyed. But beginning to understand yourself, understanding why in the final realization there is no place for jealousy, and it's a process of rethinking who you are, what you are, and so on, then you might get to a place where you've moved forward. But understand it is there, it's natural for it to be there, and it's an avoid of a lifetime to move beyond it. It takes a lot of thinking, understanding, and so on.
And this is really the last kind of third or fourth of the book. We discuss a lot of this, a lot of midas, emes and seichel, emes and Torah, lishma, personal Torah, Hashem's Torah. So this is a lot of these type of midas are things that are discussed. You can look further, and even the stuff we discussed earlier, there's a lot more stories, a lot of Torah quote, a lot of quotations, block quotations, you have it with translation, always, by the way, with all the quotations, that's quoted extensively in the book. Just another thing, you also talk about how a bacher can achieve one's unique purpose and unique self, the ambitions that a bacher has or should have, the proper ambitions. These are things that are all discussed in the book. So as you said earlier, it's really geared, what age, what type of bacher it's geared for. Is it geared for any bacher, essentially, in that age? Is that what at least you had in mind writing the book?
It's so hard because bacherim come in a range from the one who's at risk to the one who is no shas at 14 and a half and hasn't never saw a computer. The bacherim range from everything. I tried to make a sort of general picture, address different things. If it's a help, maybe in different areas to different bacherim, let it be that way. I tried to sort of hold in front of my eyes an image of what I said would be typical average. It also ranges. Today, Baruch Hashem, the range of yeshivos is large, and you have all sorts of types. I tried my best that it be something for quote unquote typical, and that I hopefully that many different bachurim can get from many different points in it. In other words, different things may not apply to a particular bacha, they apply to someone else, but I'm hoping, it's Hashem, that people get some tolas out of it.
Now, what about for parents, educators? I read the book to prepare for the podcast. Obviously, I'm not a bacher anymore. As a parent, I did find the book interesting and enlightening. I was thinking back a lot to my days in yeshiva. But what about what TLS do you think a parent or an educator can take out of it?
At least if this is a right paradigm sort of picture, then understanding it is important, because when you know how to approach, what to approach, what areas are developing, how developing, I would hope it would be a big siyua in Hashem. I think if you're involved and you're responsible, to have a sense of what an approach might be, I think is important. At least, I don't want to sound corny, put everybody on the same page. Please pardon the pun.
yeah, that's obviously what's hard to do. So I'll link to the book in the show's notes that anyone interested can order it. It'll be available in Sfarim stores. So anyone interested can purchase it. And just before we finish, Rav Aharon, is there another English book coming next? Another Sefer? Is there any plans for the next project?
Rabbis Machshavas B'Levish. We'll see. We'll see what that's Hashem is. You know what? That's the way it is. That's Hashem.
Okay. Hopefully, listeners find this interesting and enlightening. And like I said, the book is well over 300 pages. So anyone interested in this topic should definitely pick up a copy of the book and read it. And thank you, Rav Aharon, for joining me once again.
Okay. Beseder Gemara.